Abraham, the man who spoke with God. Why is it that some people hear God's voice clearly, while others spend their entire lives in silence? Why do some walk in divine friendship, while others beg for just one word from heaven? What separates those who know God intimately from those who only know about Him? This is not a small question. This is the question that haunts every honest seeker. This is the ache in the chest of everyone who has ever prayed into what felt like empty air. This is the cry of the soul that wonders, does God even see me? Does He even care? Does He speak anymore? Or have the heavens gone silent? The answer is written in blood and dust across the pages of Genesis. The answer is carved into the life of one man, a man who didn't start as a prophet, didn't begin as a saint, didn't emerge from the womb with a halo. He was a pagan from a pagan city, yet he became the friend of God. His name was Abraham. And Hebrews 11 verse 8 tells us the secret. By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, not by sight, not by certainty, not by comfort, not by understanding. By faith Abraham heard God, and by faith you can too. Picture the ancient city of Ur of the Chaldeans. This is no small village. This is one of the great cities of Mesopotamia. Ziggurat temples scraping the sky, their shadows swallowing entire neighborhoods. Idols of gold and silver lining every street corner, glittering in the desert sun. The smell of incense mixed with merchant sweat. The sounds of commerce and worship blending into one continuous hum. Thousands upon thousands bowing to gods of stone. Gods who cannot speak, cannot hear, cannot move, cannot save. Gods carved by human hands, worshipped by human fear. And somewhere in that sea of darkness, surrounded by a culture steeped in idolatry, there is a 75-year-old man named Abram. He's not special. He's not holy. His father, Terah, makes idols for a living. Abram has spent his entire life in the shadow of false gods, living an ordinary life, tending his flocks, honoring his father's traditions, following the well-worn path of his ancestors. And then, heaven breaks through. Out of nowhere. Out of the silence. Out of the spiritual darkness of Ur, the voice of the one true God pierces through like lightning splitting a midnight sky. Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Stop. Pause right there. Think about what just happened. God spoke to a man who had no spiritual pedigree. God spoke to a man who had never heard his voice before. God spoke to a man who had no Bible, no theology, no framework for understanding who this voice belonged to. And yet Abraham knew, somehow, in the depths of his spirit, that this was not the voice of another idol. This was the voice of the living God. No map, no itinerary, no GPS coordinates, no timeline, no guarantee of safety. Just a command and a promise. Just go, and I will. And here is where most of us would hesitate. Here is where most of us would demand proof, require a sign, negotiate terms, ask for details. God, where exactly am I going? How long will it take? What will I find there? Can I bring my extended family? What about my investments? What about my retirement plan? But Abraham, by faith he obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. That is the first principle of hearing God's voice. Obedience precedes clarity. You don't get the full picture before you move. You don't get the complete blueprint before you take the first step. You get the next step. You get today's instruction. And when you take it, when you actually move in obedience, God speaks again. Abraham packed up his entire life, his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, his servants, his livestock, his wealth, and walked into the unknown. 75 years old, leaving everything familiar, every security, every comfort, every friend, every memory. And with every step of obedience, God's voice became clearer. With every act of trust, the friendship deepened. With every mile away from Ur, Abraham moved closer to the heart of God. But faith is not a one-time decision. Faith is a lifetime of choices. Faith is not a moment, it's a journey. It's not a destination, it's a daily dying to self and rising to trust. Years pass. Abraham settles in Canaan. He builds altars wherever God speaks to him. At Shechem, between Bethel and Ai, at Hebron. He worships. He walks with God. He learns the sound of that voice, the weight of that presence. And then God speaks again. This time with a promise so impossible, so absurd, so contrary to natural law that it should have shattered Abraham's faith. I will make you into a great nation. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Great nation? Abraham is childless. Sarah is barren, not just unable to conceive, but past the age of conception. They are old, so old that the very idea of having a baby is not just unlikely, it's biologically impossible. Abraham is 86, then 90, then 99. Sarah is 10 years younger but equally barren. Decades pass. The promise hangs in the air, unfulfilled, mocking them with its impossibility. And yet, Hebrews 11, verse 11 says, "By faith Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father, because he considered him faithful who had made the promise." Do you see it? Do you catch the secret hidden in that verse? Abraham didn't focus on his age. He didn't obsess over Sarah's barrenness. He didn't calculate probabilities or consult physicians or spiral into despair. He considered God faithful. He anchored his soul not in his circumstances, but in the character of the one who spoke. Now, was Abraham's faith perfect? Number. Genesis tells us he laughed when God said Sarah would have a son. Sarah laughed too. They both stumbled. Abraham tried to help God out by having a son through Hagar, Ishmael, creating a mess that still echoes in the Middle East today. Faith is not the absence of doubt. Faith is choosing to trust God despite the doubt. But here's what matters. Abraham kept listening. He kept believing. He kept holding on to the promise even when his body screamed, impossible. And because he believed, God kept speaking. And then one day, when Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah is 90, the laughter of doubt becomes the laughter of joy. Isaac is born. Laughter fills the tent. The impossible becomes flesh and blood. The promise becomes a baby boy crying in Sarah's arms. And Abraham holds the miracle, the living proof that God keeps his word, that faith is never in vain, that the God who speaks is the God who delivers. But then comes the test that would have destroyed lesser men. The test that still haunts readers thousands of years later. The test that reveals the true depth of Abraham's friendship with God. Genesis 22. Abraham is now over 120 years old. Isaac is a young man, probably in his 20s or 30s. The miracle child has grown. The promise is walking and talking and alive. And then, one morning, God's voice cuts through the air. sharper than any knife, more painful than any wound. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Can you imagine the agony, the confusion, the horror, the shattering dissonance of those words? This is the son of promise, the miracle child, the one Abraham waited 25 years for, the one through whom God said all nations would be blessed, the one who carries the entire future of God's covenant. And now God is asking Abraham to kill him, to burn him on an altar, to end the promise with his own hands. It doesn't make sense. It contradicts everything God has said before. It violates the very nature of the promise. Lesser faith would have rebelled. Lesser faith would have said, God, you're contradicting yourself. You told me Isaac would be the heir. You told me my descendants would be like the stars. How can that happen if I kill him? Lesser faith would have walked away, would have called this a test from the devil, would have refused to participate in such madness. But Hebrews 11, verse 17 says, By faith Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Do you see what happened? Abraham's faith had grown so deep, so mature, so anchored in God's character, that he reasoned, God promised. God doesn't lie. So even if I kill Isaac, God will raise him from the dead, because the promise must be fulfilled. That's not blind faith. That's not foolish faith. That's faith that has learned who God is through years of walking with Him, listening to Him, trusting Him. Abraham rose early, before the sun broke the horizon, before doubt could creep in, before emotion could paralyze him. He saddled his donkey, he took Isaac and 2 servants and wood for the burnt offering, and he walked for 3 days toward the mountain of death. 3 days to turn back, 3 days to reconsider, 3 days of agony, of internal warfare, of wrestling with what God had asked. And when Isaac, innocent and trusting, asked, Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered with the theology of a man who knows God's voice, who trusts God's heart. God Himself will provide the lamb, my son. Prophetic words. Words he didn't fully understand. Words that would echo 2,000 years later on that same mountain range when another father would provide another lamb, his own son, for the sins of the world. They reach the mountain. Abraham builds the altar stone upon stone. He arranges the wood. And then, can you imagine? He binds Isaac, his son, his miracle, his joy. He binds him and lays him on the altar. And Isaac, strong enough to resist, doesn't fight. He trusts his father. He submits. Abraham raises the knife. His hand trembles but doesn't waver. Faith and a blade, love and obedience, worship and horror all mixed together. He raises the knife, and heaven explodes with urgency. Abraham! Abraham. The repetition, God's way of saying, stop immediately. Do not lay a hand on the boy. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looks up. A ram caught by its horns in a thicket, a substitute, a provision. God Himself provided the lamb, just as Abraham said. He takes the ram, sacrifices it instead of Isaac, and names the place Jehovah Jireh. the Lord will provide. And then God speaks again, louder than ever before, with a promise expanded and amplified beyond anything he'd said before. Because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me. The friendship reached its peak. The trust reached its depth. And from that day forward, throughout all of Scripture, Abraham was known not just as God's servant, but as God's friend. So what made Abraham different? Why did God speak to him and not to the thousands of others in Ur? Why did Abraham hear clearly when so many hear nothing but silence? Why did God call Abraham his friend when so many others remained strangers? Let me tell you what it wasn't. It wasn't Abraham's perfection. He lied about Sarah being his wife twice, endangering her and putting her in another man's harem out of fear. It wasn't Abraham's flawless morality. He took matters into his own hands with Hagar, creating family chaos. It wasn't Abraham's spiritual pedigree. He came from idol worshippers. It wasn't Abraham's age. He was 75 when God first called him, old enough to have lived most of his life without God. So what was it? Abraham chose to obey before he understood. When God said go, Abraham went, even though he didn't know where. He didn't wait for clarity. He didn't demand a full explanation. He moved in the direction of God's voice, and the path appeared under his feet. Abraham trusted God's character more than his own circumstances. When everything around him screamed impossible, Abraham anchored his soul in God is faithful. When his body said too old, Abraham said God is able. When logic said it can't happen, faith said God promised. Abraham was willing to surrender even his dearest treasure for the sake of the relationship. When God asked for Isaac, Abraham didn't negotiate. He didn't bargain. He didn't offer God something else. He held his son with an open hand, demonstrating that God was more precious than the gift God had given. And here's the pattern. God doesn't speak to the comfortable. He speaks to the obedient. God doesn't reveal his plans to the skeptical. He reveals them to the faithful. God doesn't make friends with those who keep him at arm's length, who want his blessings but not his presence, who want his gifts but not his will. He draws near to those who draw near to him. James 2:23 says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. Not God's servant, not God's follower, not God's employee, God's friend. That's what happens when you trust God through the impossible, when you obey him into the unknown, when you surrender to him your dearest treasures. Relationship deepens, intimacy grows. The voice that once seemed distant becomes familiar, becomes constant, becomes the foundation of your life. You want to hear God's voice? Then do what Abraham did. When God says, go, go, even if you don't know where, even if it costs you comfort, even if people think you're crazy, even if it means leaving behind everything familiar. Pack your bags and trust that the God who calls you will guide you. When God makes a promise, believe it, even if it seems impossible, even if your circumstances mock it, even if years pass and nothing changes, even if your body, your bank account, your situation says no way. Anchor your soul in the faithfulness of the one who spoke. When God asks for your Isaac, surrender it, even if it breaks your heart. Even if it's your dream, your plan, your comfort, your control, your reputation, your ministry, your career, your relationship. Hold everything with an open hand and say, God, you gave it. You can take it. You are more precious than any gift. Because here is the stunning, glorious truth. Every time Abraham obeyed, God spoke more. Every time Abraham trusted, the friendship deepened. Every time Abraham surrendered, the revelation increased. Every act of faith unlocked another conversation with heaven. Every step of obedience opened another door of intimacy. Abraham didn't have a Bible. He didn't have the Torah, the Psalms, the prophets, the Gospels. He didn't have a church. He didn't have sermons or worship songs or podcasts or conferences. He didn't have Christian books or small groups or spiritual mentors. He had one thing, a willingness to believe God and act on it. And that one thing, that simple, costly, beautiful thing, turned a pagan from Ur into the father of faith, the friend of God, the man whose story still echoes 4,000 years later, the man whose faith is referenced more than any other human in the New Testament. And here's what you need to understand. The same invitation extended to Abraham is extended to you. The same God who spoke to a pagan in Ur is speaking to you today. The same God who called Abraham into the unknown is calling you out of your comfort. The same God who promised Abraham the impossible is making promises over your life. The same God who tested Abraham's surrender is asking you, what are you holding on to more tightly than me? Maybe he's calling you to leave something behind, a toxic relationship, a dead-end job, a comfortable sin, a limiting belief, a geographical location, and you're hesitating because you don't know what's next. You don't have the map. You don't have the plan. But God is saying, trust me. Obey. Go. I will show you. Maybe he's asking you to trust him with an impossible promise. A financial miracle, a physical healing, a restored relationship, a long-awaited breakthrough. And you're struggling because it's been so long. You're tired of hoping. You're weary of believing. Your circumstances are screaming, give up. But God is saying, I am faithful. I will do what I said. Consider me faithful. Maybe he's testing you, asking you to surrender your Isaac, your dream, your plan, your timeline, your control, your reputation, your ministry, your child, your marriage, your health, your future. And you're terrified because this is the thing you love most, the thing you've waited for, the thing you can't imagine living without. But God is saying, do you love the gift more than the giver? Do you trust me even with this? Whatever God is asking you, don't ignore the voice. Don't demand a roadmap. Don't cling to what you can see when God is offering you what you cannot yet imagine. Don't let fear silence what faith should obey. By faith, Abraham obeyed. And because he obeyed, he saw miracles. Because he trusted, he received the impossible. Because he surrendered, he gained the friendship of God. The same pattern works today. The same God speaks today. The same invitation stands today. And Hebrews 12, verse 1 says this, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Abraham is in that cloud. He's watching. He's cheering. He's testifying. He's saying, it worked for me. It will work for you. I heard God's voice. You can too. I walked with God, so can you. I became God's friend, and that same friendship is available to you. You don't have to be perfect. Abraham wasn't. You don't have to have it all figured out. Abraham didn't. You don't have to be young or talented or educated or spiritually mature. Abraham was none of those things when God first called him. You just have to be willing. Willing to listen. Willing to obey. Willing to trust. Willing to surrender. And when you do, when you step out in faith, when you believe God's promises, when you surrender your Isaac, you'll discover what Abraham discovered. The God who speaks is the God who stays. The God who calls is the God who guides. The God who tests is the God who provides. The God who asks for everything is the God who gives more than you can imagine. The same God who spoke to Abraham in Ur is speaking to you right now. Don't let this moment pass. Don't let this word fall on deaf ears. Don't let fear win when faith could transform everything. By faith, Abraham obeyed. And because he obeyed, he became the friend of God. The same invitation is yours. The same journey awaits. The same God is calling. Will you answer? If this message stirred something in your soul, if you felt the Spirit moving, if you sense God calling you deeper, don't let it fade. Subscribe to this channel. Let's walk this journey of faith together. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's been waiting for a word from God, someone who needs to know that the heavens are not silent. And most importantly, respond to what God is saying to you right now. Write it down. Pray it through. Obey it. Because the God who spoke to Abraham 4,000 years ago is still speaking today. And he's calling you his friend.